Imagine waking up to find that all traces of a former war was gone, and you are the only one who remembers. Elliot Sampson woke up this way and faced a choice: to live life as it was, or to find out what had really happened. Welcome to our YouTube channel. Before diving into this extraordinary tale, take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe. Your support helps us bring you more intriguing stories like this. Elliot Sampson awoke with the uneasy sensation that something was missing. The morning light streamed through his window, casting the familiar golden hue over his bedroom. Everything looked the same: his desk cluttered with half-written notes, the smell of fresh coffee drifting from the kitchen, the muted hum of the city outside. And yet, the feeling gnawed at him, an absence where something significant had once been. As he pulled on a jacket and stepped outside, the world felt wrong. Not dramatically so, but subtly. The street signs looked newer, as if freshly replaced overnight. The air seemed lighter, missing the ever-present weight of unease he had grown accustomed to. It wasn't until he reached the diner on the corner that the full weight of realization struck him. The war was gone. Not over. Not forgotten. Gone. The old veterans who used to sit by the window and talk about battle scars, missing. The newsstand that always carried a section on post-war politics, now filled with headlines about a world that had never fought. The scarred buildings, the war memorial, the silent reminders of conflict, all of it had simply ceased to exist. And no one else noticed. Elliot's breath caught. His father had served. He had the medals, the stories, the injuries that never fully healed. He rushed home, heart pounding, and found his father in the kitchen, sipping coffee, his hands steady and unscarred. "Dad," Elliot stammered. "The war. Do you remember it?" His father gave him a strange look. "What war?" Elliot felt the floor drop beneath him. This wasn't amnesia. This wasn't a forgotten piece of history. This was a world where the war had never happened, and he was the only one who remembered it. A cold fear settled in his stomach. If something as massive as a war could vanish without a trace, what else could be rewritten? And why was he the only one who noticed? Determined to find answers, he turned to records, newspapers, anything that could prove what he knew was real. But each search came up empty. The past had been rewritten so seamlessly that not even a scrap of evidence remained. Then he found the first crack in reality: a book, old and dust-covered, hidden deep in the library's archives. A history that no longer matched the present. That's when he realized he wasn't just looking for answers. He was being hunted for them. The shadowy figures started appearing on street corners, watching him. Conversations cut off when he entered rooms. His digital searches erased themselves the next morning. And then, a cryptic message appeared in his notebook, written in a handwriting that wasn't his own. "Find Blackthorn House. Before they find you." A shiver ran down his spine. He had never heard of Blackthorn House, but he knew one thing: if the war could disappear, so could he. And he wasn't going to let that happen. Elliot's search led him beyond the city, down back roads that no longer appeared on maps, following half-erased references in forgotten archives. Blackthorn House had no official record, yet it surfaced again and again in whispers and cryptic mentions. The few who knew of it spoke in hushed tones, as though even saying the name out loud carried risk. After days of searching, he found it. The estate stood on the edge of an overgrown field, its towering ivy-covered structure looking untouched by time. A wrought iron gate stood slightly ajar, as if expecting him. With a deep breath, Elliot stepped inside. The moment he crossed the threshold, the world shifted. Inside, the air was thick with something ancient, something aware. The house was vast, filled with high-ceilinged rooms frozen in different eras. Ornate chandeliers glowed dimly, casting flickering shadows. Dust-covered furniture stood as though abandoned in a hurry. The walls were lined with portraits, dozens of them, each one eerily familiar. He approached one and felt his breath hitch. The face in the painting was his. Not exactly, There were differences. His jawline was sharper, his hair slightly longer, his eyes carrying a weight that his own did not. He moved to the next portrait, and the next. In each one, he was a different version of himself. A soldier, a scholar, a man in a world he had never lived. Then, behind him, a voice broke the silence. "You found it." Elliot turned sharply. A woman stood at the foot of the grand staircase. She was young, but there was something ageless about her. Long brown hair framed a pale face with sharp, perceptive eyes. She regarded him as if she had been waiting for him. "I'm Elise," she said. "And if you remember the war, then we don't have much time." Elliot felt a strange déjà vu wash over him. He didn't know her, and yet something deep inside told him that wasn't true. The weight of the portraits pressed down on him, as if the house itself had been expecting his arrival. "Elise," he said slowly, "what is this place?" She exhaled. "It's the last place the reviser can't reach. It's the only thing keeping your past from being erased." Elliot's pulse pounded. The reviser. The force that had rewritten history, erasing the war, erasing everything. And now it was hunting him. He had found Blackthorn House. But what if it had found him too? The house groaned around them, as though alive and listening. Elliot felt its weight settle over him, a living presence that pressed against the edges of his mind. Elise stepped closer, her expression guarded. "You feel it, don't you?" she said quietly. "The house doesn't just remember. It keeps what it remembers. It doesn't want us to leave." Elliot swallowed hard. The sensation of being watched prickled at the back of his neck. "Then why hasn't it stopped me yet?" Elise hesitated before answering. "Because you're not fully part of it yet. But the longer you stay, the harder it will be to leave." Elliot turned back to the portraits. His own face, replicated again and again in different versions of himself. Soldiers, scholars, men from timelines that had never come to pass. One in particular caught his attention. In it, he wore a war-torn uniform, a rifle slung across his back. The eyes staring back at him weren't his, but they could have been. They looked tired, knowing. "What happens if I stay?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. Elise touched the frame of another painting, her fingers tracing its edges. "Then eventually, you won't leave at all." A dull thud echoed through the house, like footsteps where there should have been none. Elise tensed. "We have to move." "Who else is here?" Elliot demanded. She didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed his arm and pulled him deeper into the house. As they passed through a dim hallway, the walls pulsed, shifting slightly, like something breathing. Elliot's stomach twisted. They reached a study lined with books that smelled of dust and forgotten knowledge. Elise rifled through a pile of papers on a desk, scanning frantically. "I've been trying to find a way out," she muttered. "The house doesn't just trap people. It traps moments, histories that were never supposed to happen. But there's something deeper in its core. If we can find it, we might be able to break free." Elliot stared at her. "You're saying the house is rewriting things too?" She nodded grimly. "The reviser controls the world outside, but the house is something else. It's where the lost versions of reality go. And it's trying to hold on to us." A chill ran through him. If what she was saying was true, then staying here wasn't just dangerous. It was erasing him, pulling him into a liminal space where time didn't move forward. Another sound, closer this time. A slow, deliberate creak of wood. Elise stiffened. "They found us." Elliot barely had time to react before the door burst open, and the shadowy figures he had seen watching him from the city streets stepped inside. The silencers had come for them. The silencers moved with eerie precision, their dark figures slipping through the doorway like liquid shadows. Their faces were featureless voids, as if reality itself refused to acknowledge them. Elliot's breath hitched as one of them lifted a gloved hand, and the air itself seemed to warp around them. Elise grabbed his wrist, yanking him backward. "Run!" she shouted. They bolted down the corridor, the shifting walls of Blackthorn House stretching and twisting as if trying to protect them. Doors appeared and vanished. Hallways lengthened and shortened. The house was fighting back. They shouldn't be able to enter. Elliot gasped between heavy breaths. They're getting stronger, Elise said. The house is losing its grip. A sharp crack of energy split the air behind them, sending a splintered wooden door flying off its hinges. The silencers were forcing their way through, their presence unraveling the delicate weave of the house's reality. Elliot risked a glance over his shoulder. One of the figures reached out, and the very fabric of the walls bent inward, dissolving like paper caught in fire. "If they reach us, we're done," Elise shouted, pulling him into another room. The air inside was heavy with age, the walls covered in tattered maps and old journals. In the center of the room stood an old mirror, its surface rippling like disturbed water. "This is it," Elise whispered. "The heart of the house. The place where all lost possibilities remain." Elliot hesitated, staring at their reflections. He wasn't sure what he expected. Maybe another version of himself staring back. Instead, the mirror showed hundreds of reflections. Different versions of him and Elise, some running, some standing still, others reaching toward the glass as if warning them. "We can use this," Elise said. "The house wants to keep us, but it also keeps everything. If we tap into its core, we can rewrite our escape." Elliot clenched his jaw. "And if we fail?" Elise didn't answer. She simply pressed a hand against the glass, and the mirror began to shift. Behind them, the silencers had found the room. Their presence darkened the space, consuming the edges of reality itself. Time was running out. With no other choice, Elliot took Elise's hand and stepped through the mirror. The world shattered around them. Elliot stumbled forward, gasping as cold air wrapped around him. The world beyond the mirror was a void, an endless expanse of shifting light and shadow, filled with echoes of what had been and what might have been. Elise clung to his hand, her grip tight as they floated in the strange liminal space between realities. The house was gone. The silencers were gone. But the echoes remained. Around them, fragmented scenes flickered in and out of existence. Worlds where the war had never been erased, versions of themselves lost in endless loops, possibilities stretching infinitely in every direction. Elliot turned, watching a version of himself lead a charge through a battlefield, his uniform tattered, his face worn with exhaustion. Another stood on a podium, giving a speech to a crowd, his voice steady with purpose. In another reflection, he lay still, buried beneath rubble, a life cut short. "This is the core," Elise murmured, her voice trembling. "The place where all versions of the past and future collide." Elliot's chest tightened. "Then this is where we choose." She met his gaze, her eyes filled with something he couldn't quite name. "We have one chance. The house gave us an escape, but only if we take control of what happens next." Before them, the void began to form a path. Two directions unfolding. One led to the world as it was now, rewritten and peaceful, but false. The other led to the broken world they had known, where war had ravaged the land, but truth remained untouched. Elliot swallowed hard. If they chose the rewritten world, they would forget everything. Their fight, their memories of the house, even each other. They would live in a safe, structured reality where none of this had ever happened. If they chose the broken world, they would bring back what had been erased. The war, the losses, the pain. They would be hunted again. But they would remember. Elise's fingers trembled against his. "We have to decide." Elliot exhaled slowly. "I can't make this choice alone." She closed her eyes for a moment, then nodded. "Neither can I." The echoes around them pulsed, waiting. And then, together, they stepped forward, toward the choice that remained. Thank you for diving into our incredible stories. If you enjoyed the journey, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more adventures.